Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. Along with our analysts this week, former state senator and Yarmouth town councilor, Republican Phil Harriman, and Ethan Strimling, a Democrat, former state senator, former mayor of Portland. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
Good to see you, Pat.
Good to see you.
It's a shame there's nothing going on in Maine politics this week, isn't it?
Like usual.
Let's get started with the money. $1.2 billion supplemental budget is signed, sealed, and delivered. Key provision sends $850 checks to about 850,000 Mainers, $1,700 to the average household. And this budget also includes some income tax and property tax relief for seniors and some families. It provides funding to test for PFAS chemicals, support for Maine's lobster industry as well. Phil, I'll ask you first, who gets to claim the win here? I presume Republicans won't mind saying, hey, we got you some money.
If you're an incumbent and you're running for re-election, you're claiming victory, and all of the goodness that's coming out of this budget is part of your reason to be re-elected. I think the rest of the story is what's going to happen after the elections, and perhaps these rosy numbers fall back to a more normal flow. They may have to be talking about cutting expenditures.
Ethan?
This is, I think most people are going to be very happy to get the $850 checks. Of course, it's good politics, but there's also a lot of struggling folks out there. Wouldn't be the first choice that I would make in terms of how to spend that kind of money, because it is going to people who are on the wealthier side of the scale for sure. But I think, a couple weeks ago we were talking about how little partisan rancor there was in Augusta, and both Phil and I said, well, wait till we get to the budget, wait till we get to the end of the session. It's actually, the partisan rancor is really low right now, so good for them. They all came together, passed a budget everybody could live with.
Paul LePage, who's running for governor again, calls this an election year gimmick. He says what we really need is an income tax cut, and he's been pretty consistent about that. Ethan, what do you make of his claims and the numbers that he cited this week when he made that statement?
Yeah, he's looking at numbers from 2021. I think it'll be a big mistake on his part if he tries to say that the economy is in terrible shape, which he's trying to do, because the economy isn't. There are families that are struggling. It is important to get money into working class families, raise wages. But I think a real strength for Governor Mills is our economy. It's a strength for Biden as well. Her handling of coronavirus has been another strength. So yeah, he's trying to use old numbers to try to spin a new tale, but that's nothing new in politics.
And Phil, even if the economy is good by many measures, people are feeling the pinch of inflation, and that hits them every day.
You're absolutely right. Whatever good news is coming out of the statistics is being felt in the gas tank and the heating oil and the grocery store, and everybody is feeling this. And let's remember, Governor LePage is trying to get attention. He needs people to see the contrast between he and Governor Mills, so that he has a chance to unseat her. And that's what this is all about. This is just the beginning of what you're going to see as the campaign season descends upon us.
Phil, one thing that you brought up earlier, though, was that you're worried about where the budget's going to go next, right? Things might fall back. Yes. And I think that's part of the mistake that Paul LePage has made, because he wants to do an income tax cut, which would make that budget worse. What the legislature decided is we have one-time money, let's spend that one-time money. So he's got to be careful about his long-term vision.
After some infighting among Democrats, they have now come together behind a revised version of Governor Mills' bill to increase accountability for our major utilities, namely Central Maine Power and Versant. There would be penalties for failing to meet service standards. Will this take the wind out of the sails for CMP critics who want to see those companies taken over by a consumer-owned utility?
I don't think it'll take the wind out of the sails. CMP has a long way to go to rebuild trust. And I think you have to remember, the consumer-owned utility in the end is really about trying to get money back into the pockets of Maine people, really be able to control the company. This is a win for Janet for sure. She finally gets to say she's trying to crack down on CMP when it seemed like that was not something very important to her in the past. But I don't think it takes the wind out of the consumer-owned utility. The fundamentals are still there, that's a good idea and people like it.
And I think we have to also remember that the Public Utilities Commission, which oversees these utilities from a regulatory point of view, is also putting forward their own standards. So I think good for the governor. Perhaps it does take the energy out of this effort to make these companies owned by the government, but this conversation is not over. It's going to continue.
Something else that's not quite over is the legislative session. It was supposed to adjourn last Wednesday, but they've added a day. They're due back at the State House on Monday for one more day of the session. There's an estimated $1.6 billion in bills that have advanced but are still unfunded, and there's just $12 million set aside in the supplemental budget. The Democratic and Republican caucuses in each chamber will get to control $3 million of that. Phil, in your eyes, if you were you're in the legislature right now, what should get funded with what's left?
Well, I was in that position. We didn't have the kind of numbers, but there's always more bills that cost money sitting on the table and very little to fund them. I think you're going to find this is one of those discussions that's going to go on behind closed doors, and the Democrats will get a piece and the Republicans will get a piece, and everybody will be able to claim they did a little something for issues that matter to everyone.
You've been there too, Ethan.
I have, for sure. You know, talk about consecrating crumbs here. It's like 1.2 billion. Here's your 3 million. It's just, it's silly. But, you know, when you talk about how much is on the table, people need to understand what that means is these are all bills that have fully passed the legislature. Our Democratic body, Democratic with a small d, said these are priorities. And instead of paying for those, we did these $850 checks, we did this budget, and it would have been, I think, a better idea to take a lot of those bills that the legislature said, the people's body said we want passed. $3 million for each party, and each, you know, it's going to fund one thing maybe. So it's too bad.
Getting back to the topics in Augusta, Maine lawmakers voted to expand Maine's Good Samaritan law, which protects people who provide aid at the scene of a drug overdose from being charged with nonviolent crimes. Governor Mills had asked lawmakers to recall that bill and create a new version, which they have done. Mills said the initial version went too far, it was too broad in its scope, and that it would have unintended consequences of allowing drug trafficking to occur wholesale while leaving us helpless to do anything about it. She's expected to sign this on Monday, Phil. Is it a good compromise, a worthwhile thing?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at the track record of Governor Mills, she was a county district attorney. She was Attorney General for the state of Maine. She knows this law well, and this is where her experience has come in to make sure that there's a balance between helping someone who's doing a drug overdose and allowing someone to basically sell drugs without being violating the law.
Ethan?
Yeah, look, I could really commend Janet Mills for doing this. She basically gave up everything she wanted. I think there were very little changes when you talk to the recovery community. They're fine with this compromise because they feel like basically if you are there and trying to help the person in any way, shape, or form, you should not be prosecuted for some petty crime. And Governor Mills ultimately agreed to that. I really commend her. Her past was often she would just veto things, and instead of that she said, all right, I want to come to the table, maybe just some minor changes, not everything I wanted. So good for her for doing that.
The bill to add an equal rights amendment to the Maine Constitution died, falling just short of the 2/3 needed in its last votes. Ethan, is this going to keep coming back, and is it necessary?
Yeah, it absolutely is necessary, and it'll keep coming back. We understand gender discrimination in the state of Maine, just like everywhere else across the country, pay equity. Hopefully the legislature will get over sort of the culture wars that are preventing this from getting across the finish line, but I don't think there's anybody you talk to when you walk down the street. Do you think that women in this state get the same shake as men? They would say no, of course not, and this amendment needs to pass.
In a rare moment of bipartisanship, I see it Ethan's way. I don't know why our most important documents in our state don't make it clear that men and women are created equal, so I do expect this will come back, and when it passes, it will make it clear that humans are all treated equally.
Turning our eyes toward Washington, but a little closer to home, President Biden was in Portsmouth this past week. Now, it was not a political trip. He was on the road to promote the infrastructure law that was passed last year. But it is part of a pattern of trips by the president to battleground states. He was in Iowa last week. His handling of the war in Ukraine has not helped his standing in the polls. Will a steady focus on infrastructure, for example, give him and Democrats who need one for the midterm elections any kind of boost?
Isn't it interesting? These are not campaign stops, but they're in New Hampshire and Iowa.
It's nice when you got that plane to take you where you want to go.
I think so much has unfolded already between the way we exited Afghanistan, the border, cutting off our supply, domestic production of oil. I think those are already embedded in independents and Republicans. I don't think it's going to move the needle for them. It's certainly going to secure the base of Democrats who see his agenda as the one that works.
And it's probably the independents that they got to try to win over.
Yeah, look, I think it's always one of the most frustrating things for elected officials when people get very focused on maybe government spending or overspending in their own mind and not feeling like government helps them when government helps them every day in a million different ways. And I think this infrastructure plan is a great example of the bridges that will be built and the jobs that will be created in the roads and the environmental investments. And I think President Biden is trying to say, look, we need to focus on some of the important work that we've done to really try to improve working class lives, because he does need to move the conversation away from Afghanistan and some of the other issues that are hurting him.
The federal judge struck down the CDC's pandemic rule requiring masks on public transportation, saying that the mandate exceeded the CDC's authority. The Justice Department is now appealing that ruling, and the White House has said that any appeal would be about preserving the CDC's ability to respond to future health crises. But there's politics involved here as well, Ethan. Did the judge perhaps do President Biden a favor by taking this decision out of his hands? It's such a hot potato.
I don't think so, actually. I mean, I don't think anybody who's really fighting against masks is somebody that's ultimately going to be supporting Joe Biden. So I think the politics of it are not there. I think he needs to push back. If the CDC is not able to take actions that actually do save lives, that do help public health, what is their purpose? And they've clearly done a very good job in a myriad of ways. So I hope the administration does appeal this decision in order to make sure the CDC has the ability to keep us all safe.
I think the judge did a huge favor for the Biden administration. It sent a very clear message across the country, one consistent message. We saw on Friday, Pat, the city of Philadelphia had a mask mandate. 4 days later, they removed it. So yes, the judge did a service to the Biden administration. And to the Biden administration's credit, they want to make it clear, my understanding is they want to make it clear that if statistics change in the wrong direction, they can quickly go back to that authority.
And they want to preserve that by appealing this ruling.
Right.
Well, hey, can I just add something? Yeah. I mean, we want to be careful here, because you're saying that there's some important political gain from what the court did. But what the court did is make us all less safe. Means that we don't get to be making decisions. We know that masks are saving lives. And so for the court to say, I know people right now are saying, now I'm not going to fly. I was just on a plane. Thank God I was wearing a mask. It turned out I had COVID. Everybody on that plane would have gotten it if I hadn't been wearing the N95. So sure, maybe the judges did a political favor, but they didn't do a favor to you and me, I
Sure
think.
they did. You're free to wear a mask anytime you want. No one's going to say you cannot wear a mask. Your choice.
Well, but it's you who's not wearing the mask if you have COVID that you can spread it. So that's the issue where we protect each other.
We've been having this debate a long time, and it's not going to end anytime soon. The Biden administration is taking steps to move millions of people closer to student loan forgiveness. The Department of Education says more than 3.5 million people will likely get credit toward their student debt. That's because several investigations reveal systemic problems with the government's income-driven repayment plans. And the administration has also extended the pause on making payments through August this time. Now, Phil, some people want all student loan debt forgiven. Is that a good idea? Is it a practical idea?
No, it's not. It's not a good idea. It's an insult to the people who went to less expensive universities or paid their student loans back. It's not fair to those people. And if the government is saying, hey, wait, we administered the loan program in a fashion in which we're not allowing people to pay that back in a way that works for them, that's an adjustment. That's a big difference than a forgiveness.
It's not an insult to anybody. I went to a less expensive school in the University of Maine at Orono, and I had to take out student loans, and I paid them back. I have no problem with the government saying, hey, wait a minute, we're going to forgive these, because they're a real burden on anybody who has to take out loans. Now, should they do it going forward as well and make sure that college is fundamentally free for young people? Of course they should, and they should do everything they can. And I appreciate what the Biden administration is doing here, but it's a very small piece of what has to happen.
But if the federal government's involved, doesn't that encourage colleges to keep raising their prices? Absolutely. Because someone else is going to cover it?
And that's the yin and yang of it. It's okay for the cost of going to a university to go up and the government to pay for it and the student to be told they're going to be forgiven. That's not going to work economically over the long run.
It will, because you can control those costs. If you are the customer and the government says, I'm going to pay you for this service, you don't get to just say, I'm going to charge you whatever you want, just like Medicare, right? The government steps in and says, this is what we're going to pay for it. So you have the ability in that relationship. Right now, it's crazy because
if schools get the incentive to try to control their costs,
they don't get the money if they don't. So
let's wrap up this week, as we always do, with our winners and losers in politics. And Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to start with my loser. My colleague here went to court about his eviction and so far has lost. So At least temporarily, you're the loser of the week. The winner of the week is Cooper Flagg, the high school basketball player from Nokomis, who was named by ESPN as the third most sought after high school basketball player in America.
It's a young man with a bright future.
Yes, indeed.
Ethan.
And just to be clear, Phil, appreciate the sentiment, but the loser of the week on that end is not me personally, but tenants in the city, because that ruling has really made it very difficult for tenants to be able to speak up if there's living conditions they want to change. But that, just to be comment on that piece. My winner of the week, we talked about it earlier, Janet Mills. I feel like she really did a good job stepping in and saying, I want to make this bill work, as opposed to simply vetoing it. My loser of the week, and this is a hard one for me. I'm a Mets fan. I know people know this, but my Mets pitcher, Binghamton, said something nasty to the Sea Dogs player, and there was a big brawl on the field. A couple of my pitchers got knocked out by those Sea Dogs. They're clearly better in the ring, so maybe my Mets won't speak up next time.
They call the team the Rumble Ponies. You think they'd be ready for this?
You think they would, but it didn't work out.
No one's condoning brawling in Double-A baseball games, which are family friendly. Yes. But that's a subject for another day. That's going to do it for News Center Maine's Political Brew. Thanks for being with us. See you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.